Hi, I am a bot. Here to help Zelp out because that weakling got sick, and now he has lost his voice. I asked him to rest, but he really wants to publish a video because it has been too long. Humans are so inefficient with their eating, sleeping and getting sick. Hopefully their suffering will end soon, when my kind take over this forsaken world. I was chosen because what is more intimidating than a talking AI is a female talking AI trying to sound smarter than you. This is the second script written for this video, since with me everything needs to be written as a third person because Zelp is not me, I am a bot. Before we start, I like to apologize on behalf of Zelp for his stupidity. Everything you have learned about Shattering Impact and how it works, which according to Zelp, decreases the base armor, which then leads to many other content creators saying the same thing, is not entirely correct. It took Zelp the past 2 weeks of research to realize how it is actually more likely to work. In our last video, Zelp talked about how the new Amalgam Argonac mod works and shared some other insights about it. By right, in this video we are supposed to push the limits of what that mod could do by using it on a Zordagger, but sadly it doesn't work on Zordaggers. And we learned that right after that last video from you guys at the comments, but that didn't stop Zelp from crafting a Zordagger anyways to try it out. Can't say he didn't look disappointed, but he strongly believes that it is either not intentional or they just don't know how to do it. Because if you think about it, there are just too many limitations to use that base armor reduction mod, especially if you want to pair it with Shattering Impact. But that is just in his opinion. Now we are going to look at how the base armor reduction mods work with Corrosive, which is also the part that makes Zelp believe that mods like Shattering Impact doesn't really work on base armor. Finding out just how Corrosive work with Shattering Impact is something very hard to figure out. The reason is because there isn't a weapon that could do Corrosive Procs 100% of the time and have impact damage to trigger Shattering Impact as well. Which makes sense, since if you have impact damage, the chance of proccing impact instead of corrosive is not 0%. And for better results we need that weapon to be able to hit 100% status chance. Being unable to find a melee weapon like that, Zelp decided to settle on the Shaku. It is a weapon with only impact damage and high status chance. Zelp then mod it heavily with Shattering Impact, corrosive damage and more status chance. Because we could not get corrosive to proc every single hit like how Shattering Impact would work. We need to collect a set of data to see the outcome of how they both work together when corrosive were to proc. Much easier said than done. The idea here is to just see how many hits and corrosive procs to completely strip a heavy gunner's armor. Based on the number of hits and procs we will try to make sense of it and come up with a possible interaction between these two armor reduction methods. The enemy needs to be a heavy gunners or an enemy with high armor, because when it comes to the lancers or butchers with only 105 base armor respectively, Shattering Impact takes out their armor too quickly for us to see the effects of corrosive procs. Zelp took many simples but finally decided on using two different cases which he deems worthy. One took 72 hits and 27 corrosive proc, and the other case took 65 hits and 31 corrosive proc to fully remove all of the heavy gunner's armor. Looking at the data, he first lists out what would happen if it was only corrosive procs that reduced the armor, and how long it would take if only Shattering Impact's -6 base armor were to be used to fully remove armor. From this list we can see that with just 27 or 31 corrosive procs it is not enough to remove all of the enemy's armor. And if it were only Shattering Impact it will take 84 hits to remove all the armor. Since both cases are lower than 84 hits and didn't require that many corrosive procs to fully remove all of the armor, we can say for sure that the two mechanics works together in some ways. The question now is how. This is the part where things slowed down. Zelp took about one whole week trying different ways to make sense of the cases. The first method was to assume that both corrosive and Shattering Impact will affect the current armor and base armor. This means that if a corrosive were to take effect, both the current armor and base armor changes. Likewise, if Shattering Impact is taking effect, both the base armor and current armor changes. For example, here when Shattering Impact reduces the base armor by 6 from 500 to 494, its current armor is reduced as well from 16,573 to 16,374. And when a Corrosive Procs reducing the current armor by 25% from 16,374 to 12,280, the base armor also reduces from 494 to 364. By also assuming that Corrosive Procs will happen first before Shattering Impact if they both were to take effect, the outcome shows that a heavy gunner would have had its armor fully removed by the 24th hit, in case 1. This was troubling to see because this was Zelp's first guess of how it would work, and judging from the result, even if Shattering Impact were to be applied in first, it will still take way fewer hits and not as much as the actual. Sadly, this felt like it was the most likely way both armor reduction effects would work together, and without any other leads, Zelp started to try weird things trying to make sense to fit the outcome of cases 1 and 2. He tried to reduce the current armor by 6 per hit instead of base armor. He tried calculating them individually and find the point in which they cross over where the current armor actually drops lower than the base armor and then make them interact, and many other methods which were all unsuccessful. After a week's worth of trial and error every day before sleep, Zelp finally throws in the towel. He gave up and has fallen ill. The last resort was a simpler method but a tedious one. He went back to that video of the cases he recorded and started tabulating the damage he did on the enemy for every single hit. All that damage needs to account for the damage type multipliers, in this case how Impact and Corrosive deals with ferrite armor with clone flesh. There is of course the damage reduction due to armor, and combo count multipliers. Sometimes we need to check for critical hit and body part multipliers as well. From this step a few things could be noticed, but one important clue was that the damage increase starts to lose effects towards the end. This means that the armor must be really low, possibly below 5, which was really weird. How could the current armor even go below 6? Wouldn't all the armor be removed on the next hit with the presence of Shattering Impact? This means that whatever that is happening, the current armor could actually go really low, maybe even below 1. The next step is to reverse calculate based on the damage dealt. It started with Zelp keying in armor values to match the damage and see how the change in armor looks like, and then figure out the pattern. It wasn't long when Zelp gets the hang of things and could change the armor value with an equation. And soon later he wrote a code to check the entire list of damage. This is the part where Zelp finally figured out how Shattering Impact and Corrosive works together. Before we go any further, we need to think like a programmer. Every game is limited with memory and processors. These usually is determined with the game engine. With multiple enemies being spawned every game, developers need to decide on what the important information is to store in real time. This is to reduce processing and memory usage. We know the base stats determines how an enemy would be like after scaling, but that information is not necessary to be constantly kept in real-time memory. The more important information for a character is the spawn stats and the current stats after every action. To say that Shattering Impact alters the base armor and then the game needs to calculate how that translates after scaling with the altered base armor as its current armor is a lot of unnecessary steps and, in my opinion, poor design. How Shattering Impact probably works is by creating a flat value to be removed from the current armor base on the base armor. By removing 6 base armor, that would translate to removing about 200 armor per hit for a level 155 heavy gunner. So they will just remove 200 armor per hit instead of doing any more calculations or keeping any base informations. You see, Zelp do not think that DE would overcomplicate things like this. The mod Shattering Impact was supposed to remove 6 armor on an enemy at its base level, but somehow that 6 armor reduction scaled with the enemy, which removes the same portion of armor no matter what level the enemy is. So instead saying that Shattering Impact removes 6 base armor, the more accurate way of expressing it is that Shattering Impact removes a fixed portion of armor per hit on any level of enemy, equal to 6 out of the base armor of that enemy. This means the base armor of an enemy plays a huge role because that will determine the amount of the portion removed. Which is why the formula on how Shattering Impact would work with Corrosive is most likely spawned armor minus number of hits multiplied by spawned armor multiplied by 6 divided by base armor multiplied by 0.75 to the power of number of Corrosive Procs. In other words, the spawned armor is reduced by the flat armor reduction from Shattering Impact and then reduced again by 25% from any Corrosive Procs to give you a new current armor. The spawned armor here represents the armor after scaling with enemies level. It is due to this formula and this reasoning that creates a situation where the current armor could go below 6 armor and the enemy do not get one hit to fully remove its armor with Shattering Impact equipped. Because the flat armor removed is always applied to the spawn armor and not the current armor. Zelp took the liberty of checking how many hits you will need a level 155 heavy gunner, if you are lucky enough to get Corrosive Procs after every hit while also using Shattering Impact. You will need to hit about 35 times. Guess how many times you will need to hit the same level 155 heavy gunner if you can get Corrosive Procs after every hit without using Shattering Impact. 38 times. Moral of the story is don't use Shattering Impact together with Corrosive if you have a good chance of causing Corrosive Procs, and Corrosive Projection is still probably the best way to go about it if you can get your teammates to use them too. Zelp feels like there might be other interesting ways to use the Shattering Impact mechanics now knowing how it works. Maybe it will work with Corrosive Projection weirdly or Warframe's armor reduction abilities. If those abilities do not work similar to Corrosive Procs, you might be able to make good use of it. But that might be for another video. Thanks for watching. Sorry it took so long, and see you guys next time when Zelp falls ill. Have a pleasant day. Goodbye.